All right, I think we should be live. Hey everyone, it's Neil here from EDM Tips for this week's Tuneful Tuesday. For those of you joining us for the first time, this session is a chance for me to review your tracks live and on the spot, providing my professional feedback on anything you guys might be looking out for. These sessions are open to the public for anyone to view, but to actually get feedback on your tracks, you do need to be a member of either our Radio Ready program or the EDM Tips Accelerator, and you can learn more about either of those programs using that link below in the description of this chat. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We've got, a moderate number of tracks to get through today. Nothing quite as crazy as last week's makeup session, luckily. But do want to, give everyone who submitted some good time for some proper review. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to kick things straight off here. Our first submission is coming from Tommy out of our Radio Ready program. And Tommy, I think, is just looking, let's see. So he's saying this is a form of classic bolero, but in the technic genre. Bolero, there is one motive repeated by different instruments over and over. I try to keep adding tension with more and more aggressive synths. Need some fresh perspective on it. And the second part is a whole new B motive. Thanks for listening. All right, Tommy, let's see what we got going on with Techno Bolero. Cool. So the first thing that I'm noticing is that the groove of this track is just a tiny bit off, and I think it's primarily coming from that closed hi-hat. It doesn't quite feel like it's fitting in the same pocket as everything else. I'm occasionally getting like a couple of stuttered hits. So check the timing of that particular layer, maybe the timing of the clap layer as well. Just make sure that they're all fitting to a very consistent groove with a very standard like da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da sort of rhythm to it. Going on here. Cool. So I like the synth riff that you've got. You've got a nice power to it, good sense of bass. The biggest thing to me right now is that the drums don't quite fit with the rest of the track vibe-wise, particularly the kick. The kick is a little bit of a knockier sort of sound with a bit of a hollow body to it. I would look for a different kick sample that's a little bit deeper, a little bit more powerful and thumpy without quite as much of that mid-range knocking texture. What I mean by that knocking texture, very similar to if you knock your hand on a door, it's that kind of low mid-range thump that I'm currently getting in this kick that doesn't quite suit the vibe of the rest of the instrument. The rest of the drums, I think, could just use some extra saturation and a little bit of high-end coloring EQ in general, just to help give them a little bit more presence and vibe. Like your use of these different synths. I think they're all working out very well and kind of building off of the previous ones. They share nothing similar, in the character and the tonality, but to the previous synths that fit, they do add that extra little bit of energy. I think you've done a good job from that perspective. Other thing that I'm kind of wondering about, just because this whole drop section is pretty long, is every once in a while, instead of continuously building on the energy, cutting the energy pretty drastically. And you actually had a little bit of a dip in energy right here. I think that was a good start. It looks like we're kind of getting back into that as well. So maybe introducing one of those sections just a little bit sooner and just cutting it for a couple measures time in energy and then bringing us right back up to that top energy. I think that'll help create a little bit more ebb and flow throughout the All right, well, let's give it up for Tommy with Techno Bolero there. Really nice work. Yeah, I don't really have too many complaints about the composition otherwise. All right, up next, we got a track coming from Wesley out of our Radio Ready program, and he's looking for some overall feedback on the track. He's saying, this is my first submission of many more tracks to come. Appreciate your work and the support from the community. Yeah, absolutely, Wesley, and welcome aboard to Tuneful Tuesday. Stoked to have you joining us here. So yeah, let's see what we got with Revelation. vibe from the start. I like that melody coming in underneath. At that point, since you already started to bring in the melody, I would expect it to either stay in at this point or at least echo out. It does feel to me like we just kind of introduced it and then cut it out altogether, so I felt a little bit empty in this moment. Good vibe and groove going on here. I think the drums might be a little bit too distant. You had a decently thick build up, so I was expecting a little bit more energy on the drop, and I think that can all come from just by bringing those drums forward in the mix a little. So I'd say dial back the reverb just a touch on them, and then give us a little bit of a high-end coloring you can use for that added effect. Like the kind of build up and wash out leading into this transition. I'm getting a little bit of build up around 300 hertz coming from, like, I'm guessing the interaction between the pads and the Foley that you have. Maybe just a very subtle EQ dip around there will help create a little bit more of an open sense of space. Okay, so I like the overall arrangement here, getting back into the drop at this point. The one thing that's catching me off guard is that there isn't quite as much connection between these two sections. My recommendation would be to start teasing the melody a little bit sooner and more consistently throughout the final movements of the build. So the big change in the drop is really about the beat and the separation. But we still have that melody kind of playing over this washy background a little bit more. I think that'll just create a little bit more expectation for the drop. Cool. I'd say the final thing, and like the biggest thing, like I said earlier, is going to be getting those drums sounding up front and presence. And I think if you do that, you're going to end up with a really, really good mix. The other thing I would look towards once you do that, though, is perhaps saturating the lead just a little bit further as well, just to bring it out a tiny bit with that drum. Awesome. All right, well, fantastic work. Let's give it up for Wesley there. Fantastic first submission coming from you. Up next, we got a track from Yaniv out of our Accelerator program, and he's saying, "Hey Neil, I fixed the muddy bass in the mid-range and changed the progression too. What do you think? The break starts at 220. Yeah, let's see what we got going on here, Yaniv." You've got a lovely break going on with this piano. I think your reverbs are like perfectly timed too, because each sound just kind of dies off just as we're getting ready for that next piano. It's a really good work there. So this hi-hat that just came in could probably come up a decibel or two in volume. It is just a tiny bit lost in the mix as of right now. So this is, the progression and everything is working a lot better now. I'm definitely not getting quite the same amount of muddiness that I was before. On the flip side, I'm actually getting a little bass now. I'm not quite getting the body that I'd be expecting to out of this track. So a couple of things I'd focus on is bringing up a little bit more of the kick, and the drums actually in general in the mix. I think those can come up in volume for just a little bit more presence as well. But then also getting that sub bass to help kind of drive our energy a little bit. I'm going to boost my subwoofer for a quick second, see if that makes a difference. So it sounds like the kick and bass relationship that you've got is actually pretty good. Again, the kick could come up just a little bit, but it's more about just bringing them up together. I think maintain the relative balance between your kick and your bass for the most part, but focus on bringing those both up in volume so you get a little bit more power behind this track. Beautiful transition right there. I think at that same moment, right when the beat starts coming in, try to hit us with a sub drop as well, just to kind of take us away from that sustained tonal content into this more energetic upbeat content. Awesome. All right, well, let's give it up for Yaniv there. Really fantastic work. I think you've, cleaned up the composition the way you need to. We just need a little bit more power from that low end in those drums, like I was saying. All right, up next, we got a track coming from Steve out of our Accelerator program. And Steve is saying, hey, Neil, looking for any general advice on this one, please, and a check on the low end and bass. Go from 1 minute, please. Mentioned we might get a little bit longer this week, but if we're short on time, you could review a bit from 1 minute, then skip to 3:40 for a review of the break, build, and drop. Yeah, let's see what we got going on with Need It. Really nice groove, good low end from the start. Feeling a nice thump from the kick, but I'm still getting that bass in between. If anything, the thump of the kick could actually come back just a very small bit. I actually take that back. I think your kick is in a good place. I was just checking the levels on my interface. The one thing I'd focus on is you have this like string layer that's kind of repeating like the sort of sound. I would dial that back in volume just a little bit. I'm not quite getting like a distant back wall in this mix. The instrumental, the foreground layers, the drums, they all kind of seem like they're roughly in the same front to back point. So I would focus on decreasing the volume of some of those pads and string-like layers a little bit. They're sitting high enough up in the frequency spectrum that we should still be able to hear them no problem. But that'll help, again, create us a little bit more of a distant space. And then I think we could get a little bit of like a upper mid-range, like 1K to 4K EQ boost in the drum kit to help give it a little bit more presence. And let's check out that 340 section as well. So, I have a feeling you've got like too many elements playing at the start of this break. The energy doesn't quite come down as much as I think it could, and then we can build back up from there. So I would focus on dialing back the percussion in that very initial bit even further, and maybe just like, utility automating it down so that it grows back up over time. But something to just bring that energy down a little bit further at the start of the break, I think would be good. Other thing I'd say to focus on here is it almost feels like this idea is just missing one sort of like melody or focal point, because the instrumental, the vocal chops, like everything that you've got is very repetitive and in a good way, but it creates this nice like almost background instrumental feel in this section. Whereas like, some sort of like lead guitar pluck pattern or a saxophone or a trumpet, just something of the sorts with a decent amount of energy and rhythm to it, I think would really help take this section to the next level. Otherwise, fantastic work. whole groove, the whole mix, the rest of the mix is sounding pretty nice. Like I said, just focus on that distance as your big thing in this mix. All right, let's give it up for Steve there. Up next, it looks like we got a track submission from Jeff coming out of our Accelerator program. He's saying, I tried a little organic house here. It's very simple, but I think it's pretty danceable, and the arrangement has some good tension and release with different parts playing different combinations of the layers. Curious your thoughts on the simplicity of the drums or if you think they are effective. All right, yeah, let's see what we got with Arches. So I really like the intro. I think you do a good job of kind of sucking people in. Good sound design going on there. Good texture in the drums. The piano that comes into me doesn't quite fill in the space enough. So I would say try adding like a nice reverb or a delay on that particular piano. And then maybe bring out a little bit more brightness on it as well. And that'll help just kind of match a little bit more the vibe that you've set up from that initial chord sound. I do think you've got a nice groove going on here. The simplicity of the pattern is definitely working in your favor. Right at this moment, the track becomes just a little bit too busy with that new string layer. I'm trying to think of what we might be able to do. Like, I would just suggest like simplifying the pattern because all of your rhythm right now is coming from the percussion and from that like melodic pluck-like layer that's playing in the middle. So the strings, which have a little bit of a softer attack to them, don't quite contribute in an effective way to the groove, the same way that the percussion is. So I would say, just lean into the sustained nature of strings, make those a little smoother, and if you want some other sort of movement, maybe add another like arp-like layer that has a little bit more of a sharp attack, or even just changing those strings to pizzicato where you have a little bit of a pluck on the string. I think that could also work out. I do like the melodic riffs that you've got playing in here, though. Those are working really nicely. Another thing I'd focus on is trying to add a little bit more width to the piano. I would almost like push it past the point of sounding natural, just so that we make it like very, very spacious. Like the whole vibe of this track is like a very open space. I mean, it's invoked by the title and the image as well that you've got. But we should almost like be feeling this ethereal sense of just things floating around us. So like I said, that piano sounding really, really wide with a little bit more reverb on it, I think would help out. Fantastic work here, Jeff. Let's give it up for him with Arches. Up next, looks like we got a track from Jason coming out of our Accelerator program. And Jason's looking for just some general feedback wherever in the track. So yeah, let's see what we got with Beneath the Stars. I would probably recommend bringing up the melody a little bit in volume from the start. It's currently lost just a little bit behind the textures of those that kick and that snare. That bass line progression caught me off guard because I was used to hearing the notes in the melody at first, but I think they actually work really well together once you give it a second. So yeah, nice composition. I would suggest adding a touch of reverb to that bass line. It almost feels a little too dry and forward in the mix compared to everything else that we've been hearing. nice repetition in the main synth riff. I do like this piano coming in, but it is overlapping and competing for attention with the synth riff that we've been hearing. So I would recommend taking a stereo imager and spreading that piano super wide. For a similar reason to what I just told Jeff is, we want to focus on this big, ethereal, spacious vibe. And one of the easiest ways to do that is with a super wide piano with a lot of reverb to it. Like the ping pong delay. You have this distant filtered ARP synth that's playing at this moment as well, in the mid-range. I would focus on making that mid-range synth a little bit wider. It's a little bit masked to just being in the center of the mix right now. Tell you what, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit so we get some more of your final drop here too. Oh man, beautiful composition here. I love the chord progression that you're playing. I do think that, especially given that you've got the fast snare roll in the build, I would add some sort of hi-hat pattern to the drop itself. I do think we're missing a little bit of top-end energy and rhythm because of that lack of hi-hat. Yeah, if you add a nice 16th note hi-hat rhythm in here, you're going to end up with some very good classic trees. So I would say that's definitely a big layer to add. Finally, I'd suggest just a little bit more saturation on the main lead in the drop, just to really help it stand out and thicken up the mix a little bit further. All right, let's give it up for Jason there with Beneath the Stars. Up next, I've got a track coming from Adam out of our Accelerator program, and Adam's saying, I'm working on finishing up this track and wanted some general feedback. I still need to add more ear candy and more evolution to the ARP. I'd also like to know what you think of the main melody and if it could possibly be improved. I've already done some mixing and did a quick dirty master to prep for this feedback. All right, sweet. Let's see what we got with this ID. Good groove and pattern from the start here. I like the texture on your percussion. It keeps things interesting despite having a relatively simple introduction with simple sound design of the bass. So you've got a good balance between those two. I like this relationship in the notes between the piano and the bass. The one thing is that they are overlapping a little bit in the center. Excuse me. So I would say try to make that either this bass sound or I'm guessing the wide piano sound just a little bit wider, a little bit more separate from the center. Another thing is that they are sitting in very similar note ranges, so it might be worth applying a small side chain to these other layers against that piano note so that anytime that piano hits, that note does stick through just a little bit further. Great groove going on here. I would like some sort of, noise or atmosphere layer in here as well. The track feels just a little bit empty energy-wise on the far sides of the mix, and some sort of white noise sort of layer, or something else of the sorts I think could work out really nicely. And that's the ear candy that you're talking about. Yep, absolutely. There you go. In terms of, some sort of automation on the ARP, because I know you called out wanting to do that, I think just shortening out those notes, like the decay and sustain a little bit so that we get a little bit pluckier every once in a while and then a little bit more drawn out every once in a while. I think both of those changes will add the sense of evolution that you really need and are looking for here. Cool, and then on this lead that's playing like the da-da-da-da sort of layer that just played, I would suggest a little bit of a delay on there as well to keep it ringing out to help fill in that space just a little further. Awesome. All right, well, fantastic work here. I think this, yeah, you're in a great spot with this track. Excuse me again. So let's give it up for Adam there with this ID. Up next, we got a track coming from Jamie out of our Accelerator program, and he's looking for feedback on the first build and drop. So let me know if any elements need further mixing, not mastered until feedback, and flick through the tune to see if it needs a longer break in your opinion. All right, yeah, let's see what we got going on here with All Night. All right, first build and drop. Good groove going on here, Jamie. Cool, good groove for the most part. There is like one percussion layer in here that seems like it's just a little bit off of the groove. It might be the exact relationship actually between the piano, the ghost kicks, and the clap that you've got. So just zoom in, make sure your transients are aligned if they're hitting in the same position there. I think it's really, really close, but just a tiny bit off. Another thing I focus on, because your drums are in the center, I would try to spread out that piano just a little bit wider. It does have some width to it, but I think that a little bit more width in general will just help fill out the mix and create a little bit more energy for you. So during this little break section, I would suggest switching up the rhythm of the piano to be a little bit more sustained for two reasons. One, it'll give us a break from the rhythm of the piano that we've been hearing for a while now. But two, you've also got that like guitar-like sound that came in the center. So if you sustain the piano, that rhythm of the guitar will stand out a little bit further. It'll create a huge moment of contrast and then get back into the piano with the rhythm in the next section. A similar comment applies right here. I think like we could just simplify the rhythm of the piano for a little bit of extra contrast. I don't know that the breaks necessarily need to be longer per se. I just think we need to make a bigger energy shift during those breaks. I would like a little bit more reverb and delay on those vocal phrases in the drop. It doesn't need to be a ton, but it does feel just a little bit dry compared to everything else. Like this break here. I think it's okay to keep the piano going at this point because it's in the kind of final bridge. You want to maintain a little bit more energy and momentum in this section. All right. Really nice work here. Let's give it up for Jamie there with All Night. Up next, we got a track coming from Peter out of our Accelerator program. It's saying, after your helpful advice on Friday, I've added a bit more saturation to the beats and added saturation to the rave chords at 150. For stereo width, I added a chorus modulation return track and sent the mid bass and the high frequency offbeats to it. Love to get your feedback on these changes I've made. Thanks. All right, sure thing, Peter. Let's see what we got going on with Boom. nice. Those drums are sounding a little bit more powerful from what I remember. So those are in a good spot now. Cool. Now the big thing that I focus on is creating a little bit more width in like elements like this particular bass. The center, the general mid-range of your mix is sounding really nice and powerful with the drums, but now I'm missing a little bit of like relative body on the side. So that sort of bass sound that you've got, if you can create a second voice and spread that nice and wide with a lot of saturation, I think you'll be in a really good spot. Well, I like this vocal here too. I would suggest a little bit of an EQ boost above 1 kilohertz. Just a general high shelf EQ with like a color EQ would be best. But something like that will help just bring out a little bit more presence and intelligibility with what the vocal is singing there. So one thing I'd recommend, so like for width on these elements, if you don't already have a couple of voices in the synth with a small bit of detune, I would just increase the voices to an even number, and that'll just naturally give us a wide sound. Past that though, I would suggest using the wider plugin by Polyverse. It is a free plugin, really easy to use. It's literally just one dial. Just dial up some width in those particular wide mid bass synths, and that'll create a really, really nice and full sound for this track. I also think that this bass sound that we're talking about just making wider, I think we could also saturate it a little bit further. You've done a great job with the drums, and almost to the point that the instrumental now feels a little bit thin in comparison. I would also suggest maybe a little bit of a low-end EQ boost around 200 hertz on those vocals, just to give them a little bit of power and weight as well. All right. Well, fantastic work here, Peter. Let's give it up for him with Boom. I do think you've done a great job with the changes I suggested. So yeah, really nice work there. All right. Up next, we got a track coming from Braum out of our Accelerator program, and he's also saying I've implemented your feedback of last week to add more punch to the kick and boost the vocals at 1 to 3K and dip at 600 hertz. And I added the future delay at the second buildup and changed the second buildup to the acid one. All right, yeah, let's see what we got with Vivid. Nice, good power right from the start. Really nice relationship between the kick and the bass here. Drums are cutting through with enough energy as I'd expect. I'm just skipping ahead a little so we can make sure we get to that second build up.
The journey into this beautiful world.
This vocal might now just be a little bit too loud. It's cutting through a lot better. I would actually take away a little bit more of the low end there.
There's nothing else if you focus on what you want.
Quieter. I would take a little bit of more of the low end away of the vocal, but not too much. But then just in general make the vocal like a decibel quieter, because that extra presence that you've now got is now actually making the vocal stand out a little too much. But I think the relative balance is in a good spot within that vocal. The claps on the, or I guess, yeah, every other clap, I think that those could use a little bit more high-end coloring EQ, just to help brighten them up a little bit further, kind of match some of the energy of the hi-hats.
You can actually use it to your advantage. If you think about it, when you imagine like bad things, you don't want those two you get that, so it's better to focus on only good things.
Nice. I think you could probably add just a touch of parallel compression to the drums at this point now to help bring up some of those more background percussion layers like your fills. I think the core drums like your kick, your hi-hat, and your snare are in a pretty good spot, but even those could use just a tiny bit more thickness to them. So yeah, like I said, some parallel compression on that drum channel should do the trick.
Now you know you can alter your perception. Take a moment, relax, and let this acid bass line guide you to a better future.
Nice. Maybe a little bit more reverb on the vocal in this break section.
Guide you to a better future. Full of positivity.
Nice. Sweet. Yeah, this is all working out super well for the rest of it. So yeah, fantastic work here, Braum. Let's give it up for him with Vivid. Up next, we got a track coming from Rajesh, coming out of our Radio Ready program. And he's saying, struggled with the bottom end of this track. Would love your opinion on whether it's sitting right. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, let's see what we got going on with Snake Charmer. Nice power in the drums from the start. I think you could bring up that like clap sound just a few decibels in volume. It is just a little bit lost compared to the power of the kick and the hi-hat. I like the ARP pattern that you've got going on here. Good groove and good set of notes being played. So by this point in the track, probably around 35 seconds, I do want a little bit more mid-range body to it. Like here, you know, you've got some occasional like pads coming in and stuff. I would keep those in a little bit more thickly, and then make sure that they have some lower notes in them so that we're filling out a little bit more of the 100 to 300 hertz range as well. Nice vibe going on in the break. Cool. So in terms of the low end of your track, I think your kick is in a good spot right now. I would bring up a little bit more of the sub bass and then a decent amount more of like the bass just above the sub. So like it really does come back to just filling out a little bit more of this 100 to 300 hertz range in this track. Now, I wouldn't overdo it because I think some of the open space that you've got in that range is allowing us to feel a very open and spacious mix, but we're just a little bit too much on that open sense. So like I said, just bring out a little bit more of the bass and you should be good. And when I say a little, in the sub bass, I probably mean like a couple decibels, and in the mid bass, probably like 3 to 5 decibels. You know, alternative, what you could do for that mid bass is just simply saturate your basses a little bit more, and that can help thicken it up, create a little bit more weight and perception there without overfilling the mix just from sheer volume. otherwise, like, really fantastic vibe, good consistent groove going on here. Um, yeah, that's pretty much takes care of it. I just focus on, like I said, really filling out that bass mid-range a little bit more. One final thing you could do is occasionally play with filters on the drum patterns just a little bit further to help give us a little bit more ebb and flow in that drum pattern. Alternatively, taking out some of the percussive elements a little earlier so that we build up to a little bit more rhythm and energy by the end. But those are a little bit to taste. So I think as a whole, you've done a great job with the composition here. All right, let's give it up for Rajesh there with Snake Charmer. Up next, oh no, it looks like we were gonna have a track from Sanjay coming out of our Accelerator program. Sanj, if you're watching this and are in the chat right now, if you could please update your response in the Google form, I can try to queue you up for the end of today's stream. Otherwise, I'd say just, get the track. I think it looks like it's just missing the private tag at the end. So otherwise, yeah, we can get to it next week. But like I said, if you resubmit and let me know in the chat before the end of today's stream, I will be sure to get you in here. All right, so in that case, our next submission's coming from JR out of our Accelerator program. And Jay's looking for some feedback on the arrangement and mix. So let's see what we got with House High. Good groove. I know you've just kind of got to mix in, so I'm going to skip through a little bit of this intro section. So Jay, the groove that you've got going on here is fantastic. The one thing I'm missing for a traditional mix-in would be the kick drum and like the full weight of that kick. So I would just try adding that in there for a little bit more thump. Gonna make it naturally easier for DJs to mix in and beat match. I like the percussion that you've got. Really nice sense of width and texture on them. Cool. I like the dissonant atmospheres that you've got. The biggest thing for me is that I'm missing like a foreground element right now. So, like I said, bringing up a little bit more kick in general. I hear the kick in there, but I'd say it's like a decent amount too quiet. Like we want to increase that by probably 10 decibels or so, just so that we're really feeling that thump earlier on. And then same thing goes for the bass line. Like I hear it tucked back there, but they're all pretty quiet. Yeah, the groove of your percussion and the atmosphere that you've got is really, really strong. You've also got a nice sub-bass relationship. I think the big things for me is just, again, the kick, a little bit of this clap and snare as well, but then having some sort of bass line, just some sort of foreground thick element to really drive the energy for us. In a similar comment to what I made on the last track, I think a little bit more ebb and flow in the percussion in the arrangement could help out. So, every 8 or 16 bars, one new percussion element should be either coming in or going out, so that we get a little bit more up and down motion throughout this overall section. I'm going to skip ahead to kind of near the end and just see if there's anything else that comes in. Yeah, so I'd say the vocals are also too quiet there. Okay, so Jay, kind of, recapping. I think vibe-wise, you're in a great spot. You've got a good set of sounds that are, all working together nicely. You've got a pretty solid arrangement as well. The biggest thing to me is the mix. And again, it keeps coming back to, like, what are the foreground elements? And right now, the percussion are the loudest elements in the mix. And they should be up there, but I'm missing, like, that lead presence, whether it's from a vocal, a melody line, or a bass line at any given moment. So I just focus on bringing up those background, or those elements that are currently sitting in the background a lot more forward in the mix, and you should have a really, really nice track here. Awesome. Let's give it up for Jay. Up next, we got a track from Maxwell out of our Accelerator program, and he's looking for feedback on the whole track if time permits, please. This is a mastered version and one that I'm preparing this one for my next release. Curious as to thoughts about the kick, that you feel like it's sticking out too much, I want to be more of a supporting element rather than front and center, which I'm hearing. I was wondering if the added bass line should come up in volume also. The vocal is indeed out of key, but I'm keeping it as a creative choice. The quote-unquote tuned vocal actually sounds off to me, funnily enough. Some elements are a tad loud, like the double clap and the white noise riser before the breakdown. Would appreciate overall feedback as a whole. Thank you very much. Yeah, let's see what we got going on with Chains here. Cool. So the first thing that I'm noticing, Max, is that the guitar right from the start, the higher one, is just a little bit too wide, and we do have a bit of phasing information coming from that. So I would just narrow out that guitar touch in the mix. Cool. Nice vibe going on. Good sound selection of the drums. The groove of the drums versus the guitars is just a little bit off. The drums are a little bit more laid back and, flowy. The guitar had a little bit more of an upbeat rhythm to it. So I would just consider nudging the drums a little bit to the left to kind of push them ahead in time, and that'll help push the beat forward in the same way the guitar is. So, Maxwell, I hear what you're saying about the vocal and the vibe. I do think the tuning is a little bit too off. Some folks aren't going to have a problem with this, but if I were like sitting in a cafe, having a pretty trained ear, and this is before I even started producing music, I would hear that vocal and think to myself, something is off. So it might still be worth repitching the vocal, or at least parts of the vocal, so that we get a little bit more of a gel between the two. And the reason for this is, with the instrumental that you've got it very pure and tonal. So you've set us up for a very relaxing, chill vibe. The vocal comes in though, and because it's off key, creates almost a little too much unease, a little bit too much tension. So we're kind of fighting vibes within the song from that perspective. If you want the kick, by the way, to take up a little less attention, and don't get me wrong, I don't think the kick is particularly problematic as is, but a little bit of a high shelf or a high cut filter reduction to take away some of the top end of that kick would be the right trick. Ooh, I like this little section. Great riff. I do think you could probably bring up the bass line just a tiny bit in volume, and I would actually just saturate it so a little bit more of those upper harmonics come out as well. Ooh, I like that little sax line. That's really nice. So in the spaces in between the sax line, you have this like guitar lead solo like layer that's playing in there. I would bring that particular element up in volume just a little bit and saturate a little further, just so that we get a little bit more of a call and response between those two. Currently, compositionally, you've got the call and response, but in the mix, the guitar isn't quite matching the same level of energy that saxophone had otherwise. All right. Let's give it up for Maxwell there with Chains. Really beautiful vibe and track going on there, start to finish. Up next, we got a track coming from Gordon out of our Radio Ready program. And Gordon's saying, hey Neil, this has been working on for 5 days. Not sure if the drop is big enough and might need another hook or something. Thank you. All right, yeah, let's see what we got with Lost and Confused. Great riff to start here, Gordon. Nice sense of motion, danciness, good set of notes. This bass line that just came in here doesn't quite match the vibe of everything else. I'd say primarily from a sound design perspective, it's a little too buzzy and like sounds like a hollow tube. So I would find something with a little bit more body to it, not quite as much upper texture. And then I think the notes that you've got in there will end up working out okay, but it has a little too much of that kind of hollow, almost FM bass style texture that doesn't quite match the vibe of the rest of the song. And then right in here, something is giving me some tonal conflict. I think it's a mix of like this chord progression that you've got coming in and the vocal. Yeah, so the vocal's definitely out. I think the chord progression's also contributing to that a little bit. So I would check the notes of your chords, make sure those match up with the notes that are being played in the R player that you've got, and then repitch the vocal so that it kind of gels a little more closely with those two. I like the melody that you've got going on in the drop. I don't think your drop needs anything else. If anything, I actually think we need to just kind of redo the mix a little bit in the drop. This super wide bass and your reverbs are a little bit too loud, and I'm not quite getting enough volume and energy from the drums and from the lead. So I would focus on saturating and bringing out those drums, doing the same thing to the lead as well, and maybe adding a little bit of a high-end coloring EQ to the lead as well to help get it to kind of poke out through the mix. And then dial back that mid-bass and chord layer just a touch. That should end up rebalancing your mix so that I think compositionally it works out, but rebalancing the mix in that way will help draw our ear towards the main elements, and then the bass will kind of just serve a little bit more like a snare. On a similar note, I think the kick drum in particular needs to come up a decent amount in volume, and then I'd also increase the side chaining on your basses, atmospheres, and reverbs a little bit more heavily against that kick, so that we get a little subtle bit of a pump and a groove coming from those layers. The big reason, though, would be to just simply help the kick cut through a little bit. All right. Yeah, really nice work here. Compositionally, everything else is working out really nicely. Again, I love that ARP pattern that you've got. So yeah, let's give it up for Gordon there with Lost and Confused. Up next, we got a track coming from Philip out of our Accelerator program. And Philip is saying, hey Neil, I tried something different here to what I usually do. For the first time, I don't have a 4 on the floor beat, and I have no idea if the drums work like that. I was just playing around with a drum set. It is just the instrumental, which needs a vocal, but every feedback is welcome. Thanks. All right, let's see what we got going on here with Philip's Needs a Vocal track. I love the sounds that you've got going on in the intro here. I'm seeing in your comment, you're saying the piano here is static. You've sent the wrong version. Honestly, I like it as is right now. Maybe there's like something later in the track that you need, but I think from an intro and verse perspective, like this is working really nicely. Especially if you were to add that vocal in. I do like the pattern that you've got in the drums. It's got a very organic feel to it. The tonal, like, bongo, conga sort of line that you've got in there, it isn't quite the right sample. It has almost a little too much of a jungly feel, whereas everything else feels a little bit more synthy. So I would focus on just finding a different perk for that, but the rhythm itself is in a fantastic spot. I like this string layer that's coming in. Good, nice body from that. Sounds like a little bit of a cello, maybe a viola in there. Nice. So one big thing that I'm missing in this track is a little bit of like low end body, and that comes from, a mix of a sub bass and a bass layer. I think your chords have plenty of warmth and body to them, like your string layers and stuff. I'm just not quite getting that low end drive that I'd be looking for. So introducing some sort of like deep bass bass, and you could even use a string bass if you want to maintain the same sort of texture. But something to help fill out that like 60 hertz to like 200 hertz region a little further. I would try to add a little bit more reverb and or delay to that piano, especially in this break section, just to help kind of fill the space, add a little bit more of an atmospheric vibe. Ooh, I love the little staccato, pizzicato sort of strings that you've got coming in here. I guess the final thing is I'm not 100% sold on this like high-end like tambourine-like sound that you've got in the drums. I don't like hate the idea of a tambourine, but I think the particular sample that you've got is almost a little bit too tonal, a little bit too bell-like. So I would search around for a slightly different sound. Maybe something a little bit closer to like a shaker perspective. That'll help just kind of match a little bit more of the smooth vibe that you've got going on in all the instrumental. All right, let's give it up for Philip there. Really nice work. Beautiful track. Up next, we got a track coming from Rene out of our Accelerator program. And Rene's saying, hey, Neil, this is my track from last Tuneful Tuesday Friday edition with your suggested corrections. With less verb on the vox, more kick thump, more low-mid saturation on the bass, low-mids color EQ on the synths, and more overall saturation on the drums. What do you think? And are there more things to be improved? / for sure there are. All right, cheers. Yeah, let's see what we got here, Rene, with I Try. Tell you what, I'm going to skip ahead through this just because I know you got a little bit of a longer track too. Good sense of space going on here. I am missing a little bit of low-mid body at this point, so it might actually be worth keeping a little bit more of the thump of the kick to start, and then in the second half begin kind of just filtering that out for the transition purpose. Cool, so I think you've done a good job with these changes so far. I still think the kick needs a little bit more volume and more low-end thump. So I'd bring up that kick a couple decibels in volume in general, but really give a nice low-end coloring EQ bump to it to help that really cut through the mix. The sub bass, I think, is in a pretty good spot. If anything, the bass is actually just a little bit too powerful now. So I would just dial back a touch of what you did to the bass, but then increase what you're doing to the kick. Drums are definitely sounding better. Don't get me wrong, I think you can actually even saturate those drums a little bit further still. The EQ, like the EQ balance on the synths though is sounding fantastic. Nice. Vocals are sounding great now too. Really nice work with this section.
Ghosts from my past, I'm haunted. Record plays in my mind, I'm lost.
Vocals sound much better now. Really nice work. I would add a tiny bit of a high-end coloring EQ boost and just a touch of saturation to the vocals, just to help give them a little bit more presence and thickness. But they're sitting really, really close to exactly where they need to be.
Finding heaven's been a hellish fight. I'm human, so human. Lord knows I try to get it right. I'm human, so human. Lord knows I try. I'm human, so
nice.
Human.
This whole section's working out really nice, so I'm going to just check out the final drop. really nice work with this section. I actually think your bass is pretty good as is in this section, so I would leave most of everything you've got here untouched. Like I said, I would just bring out the kick a little bit more, saturate the drums a little bit further in this section. I think that pretty much takes care of it. You could probably saturate the lead just a small amount more, add a little bit of a high-end coloring EQ boost to that lead, but you're really, really close as is. So yeah, fantastic work with these updates today. Let's give it up for Rene there with I Try. And last but not least, we've got a track coming from Mr. Dan Wesley out of our Radio Ready program. And Dan is saying, only had time to do the basic A section, B section this week, so no mix down or mastering, no reverb, no delays or saturation, just the basic musical elements. Totally fine. Let's see what we got going on with End of Time 3. Nice vibe. So Dan, one of the first things that I'm noticing, and I would say to look out for, is that the notes of the piano are overlapping with the notes of the vocal just a little bit. Now they're tonally matching, so it's not like they're fighting in key or anything, but their frequency content is very similar. I'm also hearing a little bit of like muddiness coming from the chords, so my recommendation would be to revoice your chords so that we create more of an open voice chord. So right now, if you have like 3 notes kind of together, maybe take that middle note out and pitch it up an octave or 2 octaves. And play around with the voicing just so you get a little bit more space among those elements. That'll naturally also kind of create this like hugging motion around the vocals, where the vocals live in their own frequency. Maybe there's like 1 note below them in the piano and then 1 or 2 notes above them in the piano. The other thing that that'll do is it'll naturally free up a little bit more space for the upper harmonics of the bass to cut through, and you've got a great bass line going on here. So the way that the chord progression is interacting with the string fill at the end is close, but not quite on point. I would suggest reworking the notes of that string layer just a little bit to see if we can get a little bit more matching going on with the chords. It almost sounds like the high note that you keep landing on is 1 note in the scale too shy of where it should be. So just pitch that up, that high note in your violin pattern up a note in the scale, and that should work out a little bit better. All right, and that takes care of it, everyone. So thanks once again for tuning in. It's been a pleasure hosting this, as it always is. Fantastic work on all of the submissions from everyone across the board. Good job touching up the tracks for those of you that resubmitted a track from last Friday. Guys, keep up the grind. You guys are absolutely crushing it. We're seeing a lot of students starting to get signed. So again, for those of you watching who aren't already in the Radio Ready program or the EDM Tips Accelerator, let these tracks be testament of what you guys can achieve once you go through these courses and put in the effort. Because these students are absolutely crushing. I'd love to see everyone watching take part in that as well and continue to grow and succeed. So if you guys are interested in learning more about either of those programs, the Radio Ready program or our Marquee Accelerator course, do check it out via the link in the link in the description below this video. You can learn a little bit more about it and set up a completely free and no obligation call with one of us at EDM Tips to just kind of chat a little bit more, see if it is indeed a good fit for you. So guys, with that, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you all have an absolutely killer week ahead, and I'm already stoked to check out next week's Tuneful Tuesday. All right,